Welcome back to Elle's Cozy Corner, where this week we're going to read Chapter 4 in The Vampires Next Door. Last week, Alison and Rodham had a kind of sorted date, and they kind of hatched a plan to spy on the crazy neighbors next door. So let's see what happens this week. Chapter 4, Alison. When Alison returned home, her mother was gone. She left a note beneath a magnet on the fridge. Went grocery shopping. Be back soon. Love you, Mom. The apartment empty. She tested the vampire theory. The brilliant afternoon sunlight filtered through the open patio blinds. In most vampire books, they were literally dead from sunup to sundown, and nothing would wake them. She turned on the TV, popped in the movie Red Baron, assuming the noise from the fighter planes would wake any living person, and turned the volume to high. Alison didn't worry about her other neighbors, as they all worked in the afternoon. A combination of gunfire and music burst from the surround sound speakers. The vibration caused the pictures hanging on the walls to dance. She covered her own ears to save her eardrums from the noise blitz. After 10 minutes, she lowered the volume, momentarily deaf from the onslaught of gunfire and fighter planes. A light blinked on her phone, a message from Rodham. Open the door. She slid the blinds over, and Rodham in all his glory stood outside her door. Scrunching her face, she unlocked the door and shrugged her shoulders as she motioned for him to enter. I was testing out the vampire theory. His jaw tight and face stern, he asked, And I don't hear a peep next door, she replied, shouting, as her hearing hadn't returned to normal. Your surround sound was loud enough to wake the dead. And you're shouting? She ignored his comment and padded towards her bedroom, signaling for him to follow. Normal humans would be awake from the bombardment of racket. Placing her ear to the wall that separated her apartment from the vampire, she listened. Silence. A bouncy ball lay on the nightstand beside a purple feathery lamp, giving her another idea. She grabbed it and threw it, and with all her gusto against the wall. It bounced. She threw it again and again. Rodham joined in, the force behind his hits causing a louder noise than hers. They hurled the ball back and forth, taking turns for several minutes before she caught it, and they both positioned an ear to the wall. Nothing. I wish at least the noises would have caused them discomfort, Alison lamented. After suffering 4 near sleepless nights because of their partying, 20 minutes of payback hurt her ears, causing the vampires no distress. Defeated, she plopped onto her bed, bouncing from the force. Rodham sat beside her. His lips turned upwards in a smile. You're cool. His own mouth curved into a smile as she met his gaze. So are you. His eyes met hers and shifted to the colorful plastic butterflies clinging to the wall, a few crooked from their impromptu game of wall ping-pong. If they aren't vampires, then they are deaf humans, he joked, hoping to wipe the disappointment off her face. She glanced at him and chuckled. He stood, slipping his hands into his nylon short pockets. I need to get home, but I'll see you tomorrow. Alison watched his cute butt and strong, sexy legs leave the room as she followed, then closed the door behind them. She'd met her dream guy, succumbed to his charming ways. Now she was his partner in crime. How had that happened? She didn't care. Instead, relaxed, with hearts in her eyes, she laid on the couch, propping her feet on the back, and took a nap. Honey, I could use a little help. Her mother's words woke her from a dreamless sleep. She spied the position of the sun. It was dusk, and she knew that meant vampires would wake soon. Rise from their coffins, or whatever they slept in, and party. She jumped off the couch, ran to the car, and lifted 2 bags of groceries in each hand, noticing the sun was drifting below the 3-story apartment buildings. While her mom unpacked the groceries, Alison hefted more from the car trunk and carried them to the kitchen, the sun growing lower with each load until it was just above the Earth's surface, fearing the neighbors. She rushed inside with the last bag and locked the door. According to vampire legend, they had to be invited inside a residence. She wasn't taking any chances on that being fake. What's the rush? Asked her mom, her back to Alison and her hands filled with canned goods as she stuffed them into a cabinet, labels facing out. She shrugged. Never good at lying, she attempted to avoid the question. I can't see shrugs. What's up? She turned, eyes fixed on Alison. Thinking quickly, she used her book addiction to avoid the question and change the subject, saying, The Neighbors Are Vampire was too absurd. The book I read today, Reliquary, freaked me out. This lady goes under New York in these subway tunnels and finds creatures without eyes living inside them. She racked her brain trying to remember since she actually read the book a couple years previously. Her mother nodded. You weren't home when I left. Did you go to the library? No, I met a neighbor. We hung out at the smoothie shop for a little. Then I came home and read. We're going to hang out tomorrow, too. Her mother's eyes grew round and her mouth formed an O as she craned her neck backwards. Tell me about her. Why haven't I heard about her before? At that moment, blackness fully enveloped the outside. Within moments, music from next door screamed through the air, saved by the neighbors. She wasn't really about to tell her about Rodham. Her mother jumped while her face went from smiling to serious in less than a half a second. She shouted, What is that? Alison, feeling a tinge of guilt over not saying anything about the crazy neighbors earlier, moved closer and leaned towards her left ear. The neighbors. What, honey? I can't hear you. She nodded her head and pointed towards her ears. A pad of paper lay on the counter. Alison dragged it towards her, pulled a pen from the holder, and scribbled, The neighbors. Her mother scribbled, I'm going next door to give them a piece of my mind. No, Alison shouted. Thoughts of them dragging her into their lair and exsanguinating her lurched into her mind. Her mother either didn't hear or ignored Alison's pleas. She followed her to the door, pulling her arms, trying to make her stop. She'd had serious explaining to do if they didn't get eaten first. Something, she weighed, that is less significant than saving her mother's life. Her mother turned towards her, scrunching her eyes as she wiggled her arm free of Alison's death grip. Alison waited beside the concrete wall and jutted out between the apartments and peeked around the corner, her heart thumping like a rabid kangaroo inside her chest. After several knocks on the door with no answer, her mother huffed and turned home. Alison scrambled inside the apartment and jumped into the recliner, sinking into its fluff, as if she'd not waited outside. She drew in a deep breath. Her mother yanked her phone off the kitchen counter and dashed outside, exaggerating movements, and the fire in her eyes said everything. She was infuriated. Alison let out a deep breath and trailed her outside, peered around the corner of the concrete building as she watched her mother pace the sidewalk, the phone to her ear. She marched towards Alison, after hanging up and slipping her phone onto her back pocket. Her mother's eyes fixed onto Alison's as she approached. Alison gulped. She knew the look in her eyes too well. I called the police. They're sending someone right away. It seems this has been going on for a few days. Why didn't you tell me? Her eyes held only concern for Alison's safety. She shrugged her shoulders. You're not home. You sleep. I didn't want to bother you. Grabbing her hands, her mother curled her fingers around Alison's. How are you going to get your homework done when school starts? That noise is too loud. It's against the least. It's a nuisance to all who live here. She didn't wait for a response to the question, but continued talking, using her overprotective mama bear tone. I know. Alison dropped her eyes. The noise quieter in the parking lot, she continued. I'm stopping at the leasing office in the morning to have a chat with them. This needs to stop. And look at the trash outside their apartment, she said, grabbing her phone and snapping pictures of the glass bottles and cigarette butts littering the ground as they walked towards home. Her red-headed mother was a force to be reckoned with, not someone who Alison ever wanted upset. She looked innocent with her bobbed auburn curls and amber eyes, but when she got mad, her inner dragon surfaced and flames billowed from her mouth. 20 minutes later, the police showed up, and her mother had a long chat with the officer, getting up to date on the situation. Alison's mind drifted to Rodham and their plan. How are Rodham and I going to sneak the key out if Mom goes to the office? If I steal something under her nose, I'll be dead or grounded forever when she finds out. An hour or so after the police left, so did the neighbors. Alison peered out her bedroom window, light from the large gibbous moon streaming through. Tomorrow will be a full moon. Werewolves turn, but what about vampires? Rodham. The vampires climbed into their car and squealed out of the parking lot through the dining room window overlooking the breezeway. Rodham watched them leave. On impulse, he snatched his keys from his dresser. Walking past his mom in the kitchen, who alternated between frying chicken and flipping waffles, he leaned against the granite bar and said, Going to the gym. She twisted her round finger to see him. Dinner's almost ready. I know, but I want to go get in a quick workout. He reached over the bar and grabbed a piece of chicken off the plate. She shook her head and smiled. He considered knocking on Allison's door as he devoured the last bit of meat off the chicken bone, then decided it's better to follow them alone, without distraction. He eased his charger out of the parking lot, spotting them just ahead, waiting to turn left onto Highway 1. Several cars between them. They turned. Knowing how long it took to make a left, he slipped his car to the right instead, made the U-turn, then darted into the far left lane, making a U-turn, determined not to lose them. Keeping a few cars between them, he tailed them into historic St. Augustine. They turned onto M.L. King Avenue. No cars stood between them, and he made the turn. So he crept slowly through the residential roads and drove past them as they pulled into the drive of an older home. He cruised around the corner and stopped in the narrow road, motor running while he watched them exit their car and stroll up to the house. Rodham contemplated getting out of his car and walking by the house, but his instincts urged him against doing so. He shifted into drive and made left turns on the narrow one-way streets, his car crawling by the house as they stepped inside. He saw their backs, closed in miniskirts and loose tops. A man closed the door behind them. Penetrating jade eyes stared Rodham down. He sped his car up and peered into his rear view. In a matter of seconds, the jade-eyed man stood in the middle of the road, behind Rodham's car, glaring in his direction. His heartbeat quickened. As he hadn't seen the man move, he simply appeared. That is the end of Chapter 4. Join me in a week for Chapter 5 of The Vampires Next Door.